Hello, friends. My name is John Wesley, and welcome to the Sense of Shelf podcast. And thank you for joining me on another installment of the Pen Made Mightier by the Sword, a little series where I dive into authors and their experiences in war and global conflict and how those affected their works. On this installment, we're talking about Roald Dahl. Yes, the Roald Dahl, the author of the beloved childhood stories like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Matilda. Roald Dahl enlisted in the RAF, the Royal Air Force, in 1939 when he was 23. He was rather tall, over 6 feet, and managed to squeeze himself into the cockpits of the planes. The doctor at his medical exam said about his height, "Well, I have a minimum height for pilots, but no maximum, so as you are fit, you'll do." He trained in Iraq and was commissioned as a pilot officer in the RAF Volunteer Reserve and posted to the 80 Squadron in North Africa to fly Gloucester Gladiators, a type of plane, against Italians in Libya. In September 1940, his Gladiator crashed in North Africa, and he received severe injuries. He spent 6 months recovering in a hospital in Egypt. He then rejoined 80 Squadron in Athens in a Mark I hurricane. After this time in Athens, he started suffering debilitating after effects of his crash and was deemed unfit to fly. In April 1942, he was then sent to D.C. to work for the British Embassy. During this time, he became a spy for the MI6 and worked alongside Ian Fleming, who a lot of you may know as the author and creator of James Bond, and who will also definitely get his own installment of this series. While working in the U.S., Dahl met novelist C.S. Forster, who encouraged him to write about his time in Libya. That same day, Dahl started writing, and later said that, though I didn't know it at the moment, was the moment that changed my life. I feel like I read that incorrectly. And later said, quote, that, though I didn't know it at the moment, was the moment that changed my life. End quote. That makes more sense. It's a little hard to find references and influences from his war experiences in his children's literature, although he did hold some absolutely horrendous personal views, which do appear occasionally. Such as James and the Giant Peach has some terrible remarks in it, terrible and racist remarks. Dahl also wrote the screenplay for the 1968 children's movie Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and if you're familiar with the movie, you may remember the villain, the character, the child catcher. And it was written and filmed with exaggerated anti-Semitic tropes, and Dahl, unfortunately, was a known anti-Semite. The easiest reference to his war experience in his writings would probably be Gremlins. It is the first book he wrote, and the story is about little mythical creatures, the gremlins, that the RAF pilots would commonly blame for mechanical troubles in their planes. And in the story, as the main character pilot is parachuting to safety, he convinces the gremlins to stop their mischief against the planes and join the fight with the Allied forces. He also wrote several works of adult fiction, which a lot of people may not know. A novel that was published in 1948 titled Sometime Never, A Fable for Supermen, is a dark account of the nuclear war. While the atomic bombs were dropped on Japan well after Dahl was no longer in active service, his feelings toward the war and his service were most likely a big influence on this poorly received novel. Also, there are a few instances throughout his enormous short stories collection where his time in the RAF is fictionalized. His short stories can be a source of intrigue, as a man so known for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Matilda could be able to write such dark and macabre tales. When if you think about it, there's a fair amount of horror in a lot of his kids' stories. I mean, Willy Wonka, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, all those kids get harmed during the tour. Poor Augustus Gloop gets sucked up a tube. And there's other pretty terrible scenes in his children's literature. And like I've said in other episodes of this series, I do not glorify war. It's a terrible, terrible thing. I'm just exploring how it affects these authors and the works that we've all come to know and love. And also, as times change and more becomes known about these historical and beloved figures, it can sometimes get hard to support them. A lot of them held terrible views that were unfortunately quite common in their times. Either that or they were abusive, alcoholics, or really any other thing that can get difficult to look past. I don't support anything of that sort when I'm when I'm giving you this information. If you're experiencing anything like those, like mental health illness or substance abuse, please seek assistance so you don't tarnish what your potential legacy could be. And if you hold horrible views like some of these authors back then had, whether it's a racist view or an anti-Semitic view or you're anti-LGBTQ in that community, don't even listen to my show. I don't want your support. It's as simple as that. So, after that, again, my name is John Wesley. I appreciate you joining me on another installment of the Pen Made Mightier by the Sword about Roald Dahl on the Sense of Shelf podcast. Please, whatever platform you're on, subscribe, rate, review. Those things greatly help out us small independent podcasters. Also, go to my socials and follow. Send me a message if you'd like. Let me know how I'm doing. If you'd like to hear about an author, if you'd like me to do a little research on an author and talk about how the war affected them, I'd be happy to hear it. My Instagram and Twitter are both at Sense of Shelf Pod. And I also have an email, and that is senseofshelfpod@gmail.com. Also, go check out my friends, Ben Hunt with the Enlightened Podcast. I keep saying Enlightened Pod because that's what his Twitter is. Go check out Ben Hunt and the Enlightened Podcast. He's a good friend. I love his show. He talks nerd movies. He talks history. He talks the Beatles. I enjoy it. I'm sure you will too. Go follow him on whatever platform you're listening to me on and go to his socials. And the Twitter is EnlightenedPod1. Also, Chris Galley in the Beantown Action podcasts. Go as well. Follow him, subscribe, rate, review, all that stuff. Go to his socials, give him a follow. He talks a lot of sports on one of his shows called Wix Picks. And he's got a show called Distinguished Gentlemen, where him and 3 of our mutual friends just sit and have a drink and discuss life, pop culture, sports, music, all of the above, and have a drink from a specific type of alcohol. So, go do all that stuff for me. Subscribe, rate, review, follow me on social media, give me a message, and do the same for my good friends Ben Hunt and Chris Galley with their podcasts, the Enlightened Podcast and Beantown Action podcasts. Thank you again for joining me, and God bless.